When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be a topic that I kind of did this series before, where it was like, how could each of the 5 kings during the War of the 5 Kings have won, right? So we did Stannis, we did Renly, we did Robb, we did Joffrey, we did Balon, we did them all, right? This one is going to be very similar to those. And we're going to try to find a scenario in which Viserys could have actually taken the throne. Now, I'm going to say it's extremely unlikely. Again, very similar to the Balon Greyjoy video. And it's going to be even probably more difficult because at least Balon Greyjoy had things that could back him, like men, like ships, his actual position. Viserys has none of these things. So we're going to try to retrack how could Viserys have won the Iron Throne. I'm going to put some notes in here just so you guys know. We're going to have to change Viserys' personality a little bit. Like, he's going to have like a growing up, he changes some of his ways type thing. I'm not going to go as full as saying, oh yeah, he's not going to be cruel anymore. He's not going to be an idiot. I'm going to say he has gotten better at hiding it, right? He's become a little bit more cunning. He's a little bit more able to manipulate people. A little bit more like a Ramsay character, because that's the only way this plays out where I think it works. So let's go back, and we're going to start at kind of the beginning of the story in a Game of Thrones with Dany's first chapter and work our way towards Viserys on the throne. Before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do. It helps the channel grow, reach your appeal that might like this content as well. And let's get into it. So, Viserys, the Beggar King. How do we get a situation in which Viserys is still on the throne? So in this situation, we're still going to have Viserys marry Dany to Khal Drogo. And I think in retrospect, there's really not a lot Viserys could have done with Dany at this point. He was in a very desperate position. But let's say he still does this. He still tries to hopefully get this army from Khal Drogo and all of this. So he sells Dany for this army. But here's going to be the key difference. The key difference is going to be Viserys is going to stay in Pentos. He is not going to go with Dany. And so this actually has a ripple effect. So the first ripple effect is going to be, one, Dany as a person is not going to be as confident. She's not going to be, I think, the full Dany that she is by the end of the book. Because a lot of the reasons that Dany's character grows is there's two things that really correlate. So the first one is she gets more confident with her position in the Dothraki culture, and that's one thing that trends up. The other thing that trends up is that she's just not willing to let Viserys walk all over her anymore, right? She's kind of going against him. She grows out of the shell to the point where she allows Viserys to be killed. And so Dany is still going to be a very capable, confident character that she'll be, you know, later on in the books. But at this point, I think it's going to maybe slow that process down. And so the big thing here for Viserys is he's not actively screwing anything up, right? He's not actively, you know, attacking Dany. He's not getting himself killed. He's going to just stay at Pentos for now and bide his time. There's not a lot he can do in the situation. He needs things to develop before he can do anything. Now, the big point of this is going to be, well, how does the Dany and Drogo thing play out? So the first biggest thing that I think is going to happen is the only reason Dany stops viewing Viserys as like her king or, you know, all of that is because of the way he starts to treat her. So that's not actually like going to be any different, right? There's not going to be anything that's going to push Dany to start hating Viserys and all of that. So even when we get to this point where we start seeing that Dany wants to take the Iron Throne for her child, that's not actually going to happen. So I think the biggest point is going to be Drogo. I don't think Dany actually would ever push Drogo to then take the kingdoms. But then we come to this point that Drogo will pay off, like, his gift, right? The whole thing with the Dothraki culture, and something Viserys doesn't understand, is that Viserys gave Drogo a gift with Dany. So Viserys was going to get something back, but it probably wasn't an army. I don't think that was ever going to happen. And so we come to this point where, okay, how do things start working themselves out? The first thing is going to more or less play out the same scenario that Drogo is going to end up dying. Either way, Drogo and the Dothraki culture is more of a militaristic style where they take things. So either way, they still could have ended up attacking the way they did. I know the motivation behind that is, well, Drogo needed more slaves so that they could buy ships and all of that thing. You just needed to accrue more wealth. That's still going to happen, right? Maybe it's, and just for this theory and this like fanfic thing, it has to happen. Drogo has to die. And so we're going to have this kind of play out the same way with Dany, you know, having these connections to her dragon eggs that she was gifted by Illyrio. And we're going to see eventually that everything with Dany and the very back end of a Game of Thrones plays out the same way. Now, this is where it gets very much different. At this point, where is Dany going to go? That's the biggest question. And for me personally, with Viserys still being alive, someone that she still considers family, doesn't have any ill will. Maybe she recognizes some of the abuse she's taken from Viserys, but it's not that point, right? They would still have a good relationship, or she would think that anyway. Maybe not Viserys. So I think instead of, now that she has her dragon, she has maybe some of this Khalasar, she would head to Pentos first. She would have her brother there. She would probably still think of Illyrio pretty highly, and they could go from there, right? Remember, Viserys is her king at this point, and now she's, again, not married to Drogo anymore. She has these dragons. Maybe they could do something. And so that's the way this is going to go. Now, this is the biggest part to me of how this is going to change. We know that Dany ends up naming her dragons Drogon after Drogo, Viserion after her brother Viserys, and then Rhaegal after two things, like Rhaego, her son, and then also Rhaegar. So let's think about this now. We already have talked about and speculated in the normal story how the dragons, maybe they might get taken from someone, right? Dany doesn't really have control over Rhaegal or Viserion at all. They've kind of grown very distant from her, and it seems only logical that Dany is going to at least lose one dragon fairly soon, because it just doesn't make any sense for her having 3 dragons. It makes her way too overpowered. So what I'm going to pose in this situation is Viserys, being a Targaryen, having that blood, is going to actually be able to connect to Viserion, the dragon named after him. Same way that I think we'll see maybe somebody else connect to one of Dany's dragons in the normal story, I think Viserys will have one of these dragons. Now, the biggest question is going to be, okay, well, how does Viserys gain enough power to take the throne? And this is where we also get to the sketchiest part of the story, right? Because I could see in a lot of ways, if Dany comes back with these dragons to Viserys and Illyrio and Pentos, is there a possible situation where Illyrio just poisons Viserys, takes one of the dragons, or 2 of the dragons, whichever, and gives them to young Griff? Could Illyrio, in this given situation, see the opportunity and reveal young Griff? How would Viserys react to that? Because in that situation, young Griff is the true heir. So I don't think Illyrio would do that, knowing who Viserys is as a person. But I think there is a shot here, given that young Griff has Targaryen blood or Blackfire blood, whichever, he would still be able to connect to Rhaegal. So there is a situation in which Illyrio could gain here. I'm going to have to say that doesn't happen, just so we can continue this plot with Viserys taking the throne. Again, this is what I'm talking about. When you try to find a scenario in which Viserys takes the throne, it's very unlikely. But either way, so we're going to have Viserys still in here. Now, let's say Illyrio, for the time being, backs them. So let's remember now where the political climate is. And right, we also have to say that there's going to be a fair bit of journeying for Dany to actually even get to Pentos. So it could be midway through the second book chronologically before Viserys and Dany even like meet up again. And so we have to think about Westeros at this point, right? Westeros is split into a lot of different factions at this point. At this point, we could say that Stannis has taken out Renly's faction, but you have the Greyjoy faction. You have like the Tyrells that we don't know what they're doing. We have the Lannister faction. We have a bunch of different factions going on. Now, I think what could be very interesting here is, given the Tyrells are in this situation, they don't have anyone that they're supporting. Viserys is single. The Dornish could also see this as, okay, the dragons have come back. There's a lot of interesting potential stuff that could go on here. Could Illyrio and Varys just say screw their plan of young Griff? This is the biggest issue, is like, how closely tied are they to young Griff winning? Could they just supplant Viserys after he takes the throne? So I think my thought process here is going to be, we have Varys and Illyrio kind of switch up their plans, and they actually do fully back Viserys and Dany. And this is what we're going to end up seeing. I think, given the amount of contacts Varys has, given what he sees is going on, I think Dorne, the original plan, sticks. I think Arianne, Viserys, marry. I think also another thing to point out here is I think that Viserys and Dany get the Golden Company. I think Illyrio kind of pulls that. Instead of going with young Griff, they push that off to a secondary thing. Again, the young Griff plot really messes with this whole thing. And so they get the Golden Company to make Viserys and Dany look a little bit stronger, right? That they have some ability to have a fighting force with the dragons. I think Arianne and Viserys marry. I think that's the key point that draws the Dornish in, right? They see all the turmoil going on now. It's the perfect time for them to enact their plan. So they do that on their side. But then also, you could see a situation where the Tyrells get on this. Now, the sketchy part is, if we do what makes the most amount of sense, the Dornish going with Viserys, would the Tyrells want to go with the Targaryens? We could see some marriage where it's Willis and Dany. That's very possible to unite them. The biggest issue there would be, okay, they're not on the throne, and that's what the Tyrells want. But at this point, if the Targaryens did come to the Tyrells, given that the Lannisters seem like they're going to lose, maybe they do it. I don't know if they do. That's the biggest problem here, is that the timing is something that really is going to mess with this. Because if the Targaryens and Viserys and, you know, the Varys faction get to the Tyrells before, that could be huge. Now, I think regardless, what is going to end up happening is we'll see Viserys, all these factions come over, and the big point is going to be, what do the Tyrells do? The Tyrells could just sit this out. I see a scenario where the Tyrells sit this out, because, again, they could go with the Lannisters, but you have two risks, right? You know that Viserys is coming over with this army with the dragons, and you also know that the Lannisters are not really on the winning side right now. Stannis looks like he's going to take King's Landing if they don't help the Lannisters. Yes, Marjorie could be a queen, but you're also going in a very risky situation. And so when we also see something that could be even worse, so let's say in this scenario the Tyrells sit out. I think it could be a likely option, and it would make sense with trying to get Viserys on the throne. So they sit out. The Lannisters, they end up losing, right? Tywin doesn't even come to King's Landing because it doesn't matter, right? Wouldn't get there in time. Without the Tyrells there, they're still going to win. So Tywin, maybe he still tries to go to King's Landing, reinforce, but by the time they get there, King's Landing has fallen. Cersei's dead, Tyrion's dead, Joffrey's dead. These characters are dead. Tywin gets there, and let's say Stannis holds the defense, right? He now is the one in charge of the capital. He has the military advantage. His army is pretty much on par with Tywin's army. And let's say he wins. Okay, well, so in this situation, we've now created a bunch of problems because Stannis has now taken the throne. The Lannisters are really hurting because Robb's in the west right now, creating tons of issues. So you have pressures from the north, the east, and now the south with the Dornish as well. I think Viserys and Dany land in Dorne. I don't think they land in Dragonstone because that's not where their support base is going to be, and it would actually make it quite easy for like Stannis to take them out before they even got to Dragonstone. So they land in Dorne. They have the Golden Company. They have the Dornish forces. They would have a force that's probably better than Stannis. They would be the favorite right now if the Tyrells stayed out of it. The Tyrells are pretty much the entire key to this. And now I think, given the situation that the Tyrells have, you know, let this happen and they've watched, who are the candidates that they can go for, right? Like, the Lannisters are beaten down completely. They have no one really there that you could marry that makes any amount of sense. Remember, Jaime's also a prisoner at this point as well. And at this point, the Starks may just execute Jaime because he doesn't have any value anymore, right? Because Stannis has taken the throne. They might just execute him as well. So given all of that information, with, again, the Lannisters being screwed up, Stannis is not really going to like the Tyrells, and also the Tyrells don't really have anything to gain from going with Stannis. You could go for maybe Robb, but at this point, Robb was also, this is about the time he was hooking up with Jane, and he also was pledged to the Freys anyway. I think there's a scenario where the Tyrells kind of sit back, they realize, okay, given what happens at the Blackwater, given what happens in the climate of Westeros, they decide to back Viserys. Viserys has the biggest army at this point, given the Dornish and the Golden Company combined forces. He has probably the best claim if you want to go with just the Targaryen route. They decide to go with them. And the big thing that seals the deal is Willis marrying Dany. That seals the Tyrells to the Targaryens, and also the Dornish have already been sealed to the Targaryens as well with Arianne. So in this regard, you now have a 3 big house alliance all going against Stannis. And you have some really great military minds, with Randall Tarley being around Viserys that would hopefully fix Viserys being kind of an idiot. You would have the dragons, which at this point, right, we would be looking at the dragons being in about a Storm of Swords. So they're not, you know, rideable yet. So going into Storm of Swords, the dragons still are not that big of a threat at this moment, just because they can't ride them yet. We're not looking at dance yet. But given the situation, I think Stannis would lose just because of sheer numbers. Now, I'm not even talking about the ripple effects this is going to have all over Westeros, because like things like the Red Wedding probably isn't going to happen anymore, because the Lannisters are going to be probably defeated and or just broken down. You look at, again, the Baratheon forces who are going to be trying to deal with all these other threats alongside of Viserys. I think Viserys at this point would take the throne. And at that point, he would just have probably too much support. He would be able to take over. And I don't know if Robb would bend the knee, but at this point, he might think about it. So that is the best way I could maybe conjure up a scenario, given the start of the story, where Viserys could win. There's so many things you have to contrive to get it there. It's by far the least likely thing to happen, because so many things have to happen for that to make sense. Like, Viserys just can't be as foolish and as cruel or as an idiot as he is. You have to have a scenario in which the Dany plotline still more or less plays out the same way, but in this case, Viserys gets a dragon. And probably the biggest one is just like what the Tyrells do, because in the War of the Five Kings, what the Tyrells do, it makes the biggest difference. And if you want to do the scenario and you don't have the Tyrells staying out of the war or joining someone else, Viserys is actually just screwed. So yeah, thank you guys all for watching this video. Let me know if you guys can think of a better way Viserys could have ended up on the throne, given the beginning of the story, not before then with whatever you thought could have maybe happened at the end of Robert's Rebellion. But thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.